Hi. Welcome to Luna Listens to Books channel. If you like my channel, please like and subscribe. Now the story begins. Before the wedding, Daniel looked at me with a mix of hesitation and hope. Can you give me a month? He asked. He wanted to try rekindling his relationship with his ex-girlfriend. If he succeeded, it would prove they were meant to be. If he failed, he promised to return, marry me, and leave her in the past forever. I didn't argue. Instead, Ismiled faintly and replied sincerely, go ahead, give it atryAfter. Lifeshouldn't have regrets, right? That night, hedrove off, lookingreleved, almost happy, meanwhile quietly packed my belongings and called home. Mom, I said, my voice steady, I'm not getting married. I'm coming home to help you with the family business. Before the wedding, Daniel looked at me with a mix of hesitation and hope. Can you give me a month? He asked. He wanted to try rekindling his relationship with his ex-girlfriend. If he succeeded, it would prove they were meant to be. If he failed, he promised to return, marry me, and leave her in the past forever. I didn't argue. Instead, I smiled faintly and replied sincerely, go ahead, give it a try. After all, life shouldn't have regrets, right? That night, he drove off, looking relieved, almost happy. Meanwhile, I quietly packed my belongings and called home. Mom, I said, my voice steady, I'm not getting married. I'm coming home to help you with the family business. I could feel my mother's excitement through the phone. Finally. Your dad and I always said that man wasn't reliable. 7 years of dating, and he still couldn't commit. She didn't wait for me to reply. Perfect timing. Our art studio in Chicago needs someone to settle the accounts. I'll arrange everything for you. Sure, I said, cutting the conversation short. Chicago sounded ideal far enough to leave everything, especially him, behind. As I stood amidst the scattered wedding souvenirs, all I felt was a quiet, bitter amusement. 7 years with Daniel Rhodes. 7 years of believing we had a future. I stood by his side through the toughest years of his life, believing that all the sacrifices would eventually pay off. But what I thought was the start of our happily ever after turned out to be nothing more than a fragile dream. When I graduated, everyone, teachers, classmates, even family, thought Daniel and I would celebrate with a graduation certificate in one hand and a marriage certificate in the other. After all, I attended the ceremony wearing a wedding dress, full of hope and love. While others dreamed of bright futures, 6-figure salaries, or pursuing advanced degrees, I turned my back on the promising path my parents had laid out for me. I chose him. Firmly. Without hesitation. All I ever wanted was to marry Daniel and spend the rest of my life by his side. Years passed. Friends around me built their lives marrying, starting families, and some even remarrying. But I waited. Always waiting for Daniel. Waiting for the day he would finally be ready. Waiting for him to say, let's get married. 7 years slipped through my fingers, and with them, countless class reunions where my supposed wedding became a recurring joke. My friends would step in to explain for me, teasing that I simply enjoyed being in love and wasn't ready for the grave of marriage. But that wasn't the truth. Not even close. I wanted to settle down more than anyone else, to be his wife, to start our forever. For the right time, he was waiting for someone else. His first love, Abigail Turner. 3 months ago, she returned to Washington. Daniel didn't say much after that. Instead of pulling away, Daniel became unusually active in preparing for our wedding. He accompanied me to try on wedding dresses, patiently staying with me from morning till night. He joined me in sampling dishes at countless hotels, never showing a hint of impatience, even when we changed venues over and over. He suddenly took interest in the smallest details, like choosing the perfect souvenirs, things he had never cared about before. I thought it was his way of giving me a sense of security, a silent promise that he had finally let go of Abigail. I dared to believe he had moved on. But that illusion shattered late one night. I woke up and noticed the light in his study was still on. Curious, I walked over, only to see him holding Abigail's belongings, taken carefully from the bookcase. He cradled them like treasures, his expression tender, almost reverent. I froze in the doorway, watching as he sat there, lost in memories. He didn't see me, but I saw everything. In that moment, it became painfully clear this wasn't just about Daniel and me. Our future wasn't in our hands. Whether we could get married depended on Abigail, and whether she would ever want him back. I was just a placeholder, a role easily discarded. Isn't there a saying? The things we can't have in our youth will haunt us for a lifetime. If that's true for a forgotten trinket, how much stronger must it be for someone who once meant everything? As the wedding day approached, tasks began to pile up. Amid the chaos, I noticed the souvenirs we had received that afternoon weren't packed properly. After arguing fruitlessly with the merchant, I had no choice but to take the souvenirs home and pack them myself. The task stretched late into the night, and by the time I looked up, the clock was inching toward the early hours of the morning. Daniel hadn't returned yet. He'd gone to attend an event in another city, and his flight was supposed to land at 11 p.m. Just as I picked up my phone to message him, I heard the sound of the door unlocking. He stepped in, arms full of things, and greeted me the way he always did, with a soft kiss on the cheek. Among the items he carried were gifts and a bouquet of fresh flowers. "Lily," he said, his voice warm yet somber. "Thank you for staying with me all these years." I knew what he meant. When he graduated, Daniel had a bold dream of starting his own business. No one believed in him, not even his family. No one, except me. I went against my parents' wishes, took the dowry they had carefully prepared, and sold every shop and house I owned to fund his dream. It wasn't easy, but I believed in him wholeheartedly. Time proved me right. Daniel's company is now a leader in the industry. He is young, successful, and admired a man who has achieved everything he once set out to accomplish. And now, he wanted to tie up the loose ends of his past. When he put the gifts down and turned to me, his expression was serious. "Lily, I want to spend a month trying to get Abigail back," he said, his tone calm but unwavering. I wasn't surprised. "I don't want to leave any regrets," he continued. "You wouldn't want me to still think about another person after we're married, would you? I promise that if I don't succeed, I'll let her go completely. I'll guard you and spend the rest of my life with you." His eyes were red, his voice thick with emotion. It was the kind of vulnerability that should have moved me, should have made me feel closer to him. Instead, all I felt was an ache in my chest. I couldn't say no. Maybe it was because I remembered how, when we first started dating, he had told me plainly that Abigail still lived in his heart. "If you mind, you shouldn't be with me," he had said. I didn't mind then. I thought I could wait, that time and love would heal the wounds she left behind. But now, as I looked at him standing before me, asking for permission to chase her once more, I realized how naive I had been. "Okay," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the storm inside. "Go." I looked at Daniel, my face serious as I replied, "After all, life should not leave regrets, right?" He didn't even pause to confirm if I truly meant it. Instead, he smiled, thanked me for understanding him just as I always had, and left, happily packing his things and driving away into the night. I stood amidst the wedding souvenirs scattered across the floor. The elegant packaging, the neatly placed gifts, every detail carefully arranged by my hands just hours ago. A wave of irony washed over me. It's a pity they'll never be sent out. Picking up the bouquet Daniel had brought earlier, I noticed a small card tucked inside. I hesitated, then flipped it over. "Abigail, long time no see. I hope you're still doing well." The name hit me like a cold gust of wind. So, he had bought 2 bouquets, one for me and one for her. In his rush, he must have taken the wrong one. I didn't mind. But I couldn't help but wonder, would he feel a twinge of awkwardness when he handed her my flowers and realized his mistake? Without another thought, I tossed the bouquet into the trash. Later, I noticed a message from my mother. The flight is booked for a week from now. You've been in Washington for so many years, use this time to say goodbye. I decided to do just that. While Daniel was away, I roamed the city I had called home for so long. I had dinner with friends, revisited old haunts, and slowly said my farewells to Washington. Daniel's calls came like clockwork every day. Lily, what are you up to? I miss you. Nothing much, I replied, my voice steady. Just packing up at home. I told him the truth. He didn't ask any more questions, but he kept calling to share where he was and what he was doing. Daniel mentioned how nervous he was about meeting Abigail after all these years. It struck me as odd, this habit of ours. Over the years, we have grown accustomed to sharing everything. Whenever he traveled for work, it was natural for us to say we missed each other and chat about the day's events. Now, even as he prepared to see Abigail, he still called me to report. Habit, I realized, is a particularly terrible thing. I remained silent for a while. Are you angry? Why aren't you saying anything? He asked, his voice tinged with concern. No, I said softly, the words bitter on my tongue. I wish you the best. Even I wasn't sure how I managed to say it. Daniel was silent for a moment too. Then, after what felt like forever, he said quietly, I'll come back as soon as possible. No matter what the result is, I owe you. I wanted to believe him. I might have even believed him for a fleeting second. But it didn't matter anymore. Because this time, I was ready to let 3 days later, Daniel returned. I hadn't expected him to come back so soon. But what shocked me more was that standing next to him was Abigail. I still remember the first time I met Abigail. Back then, I had felt a pang of envy. She was the kind of girl who wasn't afraid to break the rules, a little wild, yet undeniably magnetic. Stunningly beautiful, she exuded confidence and flair. The air between us was tense, laden with unspoken history. The kind of natural charisma Abigail possessed was something I could never emulate, shaped as I was by years of discipline and propriety. She had a tattoo curling elegantly along the side of her neck, her sunglasses perched atop her head, and her loose curls cascading over her shoulders. Lily, long time no see, she greeted me, her voice familiar but carrying an undertone of weariness. It struck me as strange this version of Abigail seemed so different from the confident, untouchable figure in my memories. She asked politely if she could come in, and I, somewhat stunned by her sudden appearance, stepped aside to let her enter. As she walked in, Abigail accidentally bumped into a decorative bear adorned with a wedding bow tie, sending it tumbling to the ground. She crouched down, picked it up, and handed it back to me with a faint smile. I forgot to congratulate you, she said. I wish you and Daniel a happy wedding. Her words were cordial, yet they carried a weight I couldn't quite decipher. I simply nodded in response, unsure of what else to say. Abigail wandered around the living room, her gaze sweeping over the sparse decor. The house was unervingly empty. Most of my belongings had already been shipped back to my parents' home. All that remained were items belonging to Daniel or shared mementos I couldn't bear to sort through. Daniel, too, noticed the change. Lily, he asked, puzzled, why does the house feel so empty? I've been organizing and clearing you some things, I said casually, brushing off his concern with a vague excuse. Abigail sat down and removed her sunglasses, revealing bruised eye sockets and faint scars etched across her face. At that moment, I understood why she seemed so different. The unshakable confidence she once had was now dulled, replaced by visible signs of hardship. As you can see, Abigail began, her voice soft but steady, I'm not doing well. She explained that her years abroad had not unfolded as she had imagined. The man she referred to as her husband had never intended to marry her. For him, she had merely been a fleeting distraction. She had been trapped abroad, battling severe depression, unable to return. It wasn't until she reached out to Daniel that things began to change. Thanks to Daniel's help over the years, I never lost myself there, she said quietly. When Daniel heard this, his nerves were palpable. I could tell what was making him anxious. It wasn't just that they hadn't spoken recently, it was that they'd been in contact all along, over the years. Daniel spends a month with me every year, at the end of the year. Without him, I wouldn't have made it through, she added. It all suddenly made sense. Daniel had always told me he was going on a business trip for a month at the end of each year. But it wasn't a business trip. He had been going to see Abigail. She continued, when Daniel started his business, I heard you sold your dowry to give him the startup capital. I was in trouble at the time too, she explained, her voice tinged with a hint of regret. So, Daniel sent me $100,000 to help. That explained it, the missing $100,000 from his company's accounts. It was never just a financial discrepancy. It was a hidden part of Daniel's life with Abigail that I had never known. In just a few words, I realized the extent of what Daniel had done for Abigail. This time I came back to Washington, it's all thanks to Daniel. Lily, I have no hostility towards you. She smiled at me and continued, let's try to get along well in the future, okay? It sounded like a request, but it felt more like a subtle form of moral pressure. After all, Abigail had been hurt so much, and all she wanted was for us to get along. If I refused, it would seem callous. But I wasn't sure what she meant by getting along well in the future. If this had been earlier, I probably would have reacted with anger. No one wants someone else intruding on their relationship. But now, I just found it laughable. How could I take their requests seriously? Fine, get along well, I said, knowing it didn't matter much. I was leaving soon anyway, so why bother making a big deal out of it? Abigail stayed in the master bedroom, while Daniel and I slept in the second bedroom next to it. Daniel explained that Abigail's depression was severe and that she cried for hours every night. The master bedroom was well soundproofed, so she wouldn't disturb me. I agreed to that arrangement. Before going to sleep, Daniel held me like he always did. His chest pressed against my back, his breath warm and soft against my neck, sending a light, tickling sensation down my spine. The words he spoke cut through me like a knife. Lily, I think Abigail is different now. She's changed, and I can't help but feel she's dirty. You've noticed it too, haven't you? But I just can't let go of her. I feel sorry for both you and her. But you have to believe me when I say I will only marry you, I love you. I couldn't tell if Daniel had been drinking too much with Abigail before going to bed, but he talked to me all night. He shared everything, things he should have kept to himself and things that hurt more than I could handle. Just when I felt myself drifting off to sleep, I noticed an emptiness beside me. Daniel was gone. When I woke up the next morning, I saw him walking out of the master bedroom. He explained that Abigail needed to take her medication regularly, so he had gone in to remind her. I didn't press him, trying to be understanding. At breakfast, Abigail struggled with the unfamiliar dish. Daniel quickly ran downstairs to the convenience store to buy a steak. Normally, he didn't cook, but this time, he fried it himself and brought it to her. Abigail smiled at me teasingly. Daniel is so good at taking care of people. You must be so happy all these years, right? I just smiled and didn't reply. We had lived together for so long, and while Daniel couldn't stand the kitchen fumes, I was the one who always cooked. I didn't even know that Daniel could fry steak. He did it so skillfully, and the presentation was beautiful. He didn't know how to cook at first, Abigail said, as if boasting. But every year when he came to see me, he'd fry a steak for me, and eventually, he learned. You know, Daniel is really good at cooking, right? Her tone felt almost like she was claiming him, as if I hadn't been the one by his side all these years. Daniel glanced at me, looking uncomfortable. I'm sorry, Lily. I've been too busy lately, but I'll definitely cook for you more in the future. I just laughed it off and didn't say much. After breakfast, Daniel quickly took Abigail to the hospital for a checkup. As I dragged my suitcase out of the room, he looked at me, puzzled. Are you going on a business trip? Didn't hear you mention it. Yes, I'm going on a business trip, I replied. Daniel, in a rush, didn't ask any more questions and hurried out. Maybe Daniel truly cared too much about Abigail. Otherwise, the Daniel I knew attentive, meticulous would have noticed that all my documents were gone, that traces of me had almost been erased from the house. "Are you leaving now?" he asked, his voice breaking through the silence. There were still 3 hours until my flight took off, and somehow, I found myself standing at the crossroads of what had been my life with him. I had spent so many sleepless nights wondering what life would be like without Daniel. What would it feel like to walk away? I hadn't expected it to happen like this on such an ordinary morning, or so plainly. "Yes, I'm leaving now," I said, my voice quiet but resolute. Daniel was helping Abigail, who had just complained of feeling unwell. He waited by the door, his hand on her arm. When he saw me struggling with the suitcase, he started to step forward to help, but paused, his gaze shifting to Abigail, making it impossible for him to take that step. "I'll take you," Daniel offered. "No, it's not on the way to the hospital," I replied. "I can just take a taxi." Daniel let out a breath of relief, visibly grateful. He turned to help Abigail downstairs, but before he left, I called after him softly, "Daniel, goodbye." He walked away quickly, likely not hearing me at all. At the airport, I received the physical examination report for Abigail, sent by Daniel. He told me she was in a terrible condition, not just suffering from severe depression, but also battling a serious infectious disease. Daniel couldn't accept her like this. He was going to give up. "Lily, our wedding will be held as scheduled. Have you booked your parents' tickets to come over?" I took a screenshot of my flight to Chicago and sent it to him. "I've been waiting for you for so many years. I'm tired of waiting. Daniel, let's break up." The phone rang the moment I hit send. "Flight G3521 to Chicago is ready to board. Passengers, please proceed to Gate 5. The announcement echoed over the terminal. The last text message I saw on my phone from Daniel was, "Lily, do you dare to leave me? What is there to be afraid of? Daniel, I am not your second choice after your so-called first love has tarnished. Before, I loved you, and you took advantage of that. But now, I don't love you anymore." I removed the SIM card from my phone and boarded the plane, not looking back. On the plane, memories flooded me. I remembered the first time I met Abigail at the airport. The moment I saw her, I knew I could never replace her in Daniel's heart. Abigail's beauty was striking and confident, impossible to ignore. Even Daniel, who I had been with for a year by that time, couldn't help but be captivated by her. When I met Abigail, I was still just a student, and her confidence made me feel small in comparison. She smiled when she saw me. And I, in return, felt as though I was facing a formidable rival. In the end, she was Daniel's ex-girlfriend. I couldn't help but wonder if she was trying to provoke me, flaunting her past with him, or simply telling me I wasn't worthy of him. Unexpectedly, the first thing she said was, "I'm getting married soon. Don't worry, I have no hostility towards you. I'm just curious about his current girlfriend." She spun the ring on her finger as she spoke. When she mentioned her husband, the smile that spread across her face was all-encompassing. And then, I noticed something I hadn't before. When Abigail wasn't smiling, her eyes and eyebrows reminded me of myself. It all made sense then. I understood why, when I first met Daniel, he kept asking me questions like, "Do you have a sister named Abigail?" Then it clicked. That's why he always said I looked better when I didn't smile. Looking back, Daniel's decision to be with me, maybe part of it was because I resembled Abigail, just enough to make her memory linger. Abigail didn't waste time on small talk. Knowing I was curious, she briefly told me their story. Daniel had dropped out of school for a year because of Abigail, before he finally managed to get back on track and get into university. Abigail told me that if I had seen Daniel at that time, I would have stayed far away from him, wouldn't have even given him a second glance. Because at that time, Daniel was rotten to the core. And Abigail was the one who had shaped him like that. She said Daniel wasn't like that before he met her. There was a time when they were leaving a bar, and her companion got drunk, accidentally injuring her. It was Daniel who stepped in to protect her. Abigail found that gesture so interesting that she started following him around, pestering him every day, until they became a couple. What happened next? I asked, eager for more. But Abigail changed the subject. She said they were just playing around at the time, but Daniel had taken it too seriously, so serious that it eventually scared her. So, she broke up with him. She sighed, and I could almost sense why. She might still feel a little regret for letting Daniel go. But I'm very happy now, she added. Abigail's expression shifted slightly, her voice filled with a sense of relief. My husband is taking me abroad and giving me the best life, she said, her tone light. And Daniel should focus on his studies in college. She paused before adding, he and I are on different paths, but you're lucky because you're on the right one. After we met, I sent a message asking Daniel to pick me up. I'll admit, it was partly to stake my claim. But in the end, I realized it wasn't necessary. I couldn't understand the lasting bond between them. When they saw each other, they didn't speak a word, yet it felt like their eyes exchanged so much. But I couldn't know for sure. Daniel took my hand and asked why it was so cold. I didn't get it then, why he never mentioned how he couldn't let go of Abigail. Now I understand. He was afraid of disturbing Abigail's life. After all, Abigail was being whisked away by her husband in $1 million supercar, her face lit with happiness. Meanwhile, I was in the middle of winter, blowing into my hands, riding Daniel's electric scooter back to school. He didn't say another word the whole way. That night, after returning, we went to a small hotel by the school. We became each other's, completely. As I was about to fall asleep, I heard Daniel whisper, "I'll treat you well for the rest of my life." I never truly understood their connection. From my perspective, Daniel was held back by Abigail. Before he dropped out, he was the top science student, the one the school had high hopes for. With his grades, he shouldn't have ended up in Gyeongda, he could have gone so much further. But because of Abigail, he lost a better chance. And then she betrayed him, ending things without hesitation. But Daniel didn't blame her. In fact, he couldn't let her go for years. I didn't understand before, but now I do. The truth is simple, Daniel, he was a fool. When I arrived in Chicago, the intense ultraviolet rays hit me as soon as I stepped off the plane. I hadn't seen such bright sunlight in so long. Is this Lily? I'm Archer Jones from the art studio. They sent me to pick you up, a voice called out. A boy eagerly approached me as soon as I stepped out. Why couldn't I reach you by phone? Thankfully, your flight wasn't delayed, or I wouldn't have known how to find you. I shook my phone and explained that I had removed the SIM card back in Washington. Disconnected from Washington, he asked, raising an eyebrow. Yep, I replied. So determined, huh? Did you just break up with a boyfriend back there? He chuckled, taking my bags and teasing me as he guided me out of the airport. I guess you could say that. He laughed heartily and gave me a friendly pat on the shoulder. Don't worry, you won't be disappointed here. I'll arrange a party for you tonight, he said cheerfully. Let's go to the studio first, I suggested. Archer nodded and ushered me into the car, heading straight for the studio. Along the way, he filled me in on the studio's current situation. My parents love to travel and collect artworks, he explained. And, sometimes gifts are part of the social scene. At first, they just bought pieces when needed, but then they thought it'd be better to have a studio. Plus, with the lower taxes here in Chicago, it made sense to open one here. They told me you originally studied art, he asked. Yes, but I haven't been involved with it for a long time, I admitted. After all, I'd spent so many years focused on Daniel and his career. As I flipped through the studio's collection album, my interest deepened. My parents had always hoped I'd find something I was passionate about after graduation. Art appreciation was always something I loved, so I could see why they had sent me here first. "Can I borrow your phone for a second?" I asked. Without hesitation, Archer handed me his phone. I called my parents to let them know I had arrived safely. They were relieved and told me to enjoy my time here as long as I liked. They'd take care of everything after the wedding. "Lily, Daniel didn't know you left suddenly, did he?" they asked. "He kept calling me, even reaching out to the administrative number at your father's company," my mother said with a sneer. "He even flew over to see us, but your father and I made sure to block him." Her tone was laced with contempt, as it always had been when it came to Daniel. "Now he's acting like he can't live without you. What have you been doing all this time?" she continued. "Lucky you went to Chicago, or you'd have had to deal with him again." How unlucky that would have been. I didn't defend Daniel in front of my parents, not this time. My mother had always said that if he truly cared about me, he would have married me long ago. Back then, I was stubborn and didn't want to accept it. But now, looking back, I see she was right. Changing my environment has had a profound effect on me. Though I still think about Daniel often, my new life here has been overwhelming in the best way possible. The studio's situation was more complex than I initially realized. What was supposed to be a simple clearing of accounts turned out to be a full re-evaluation of the artworks. Many pieces had been acquired years ago, and it was necessary to track the original transaction prices to determine if they had appreciated in value. There were also numerous artworks that required re-identification and further discussion. Not only did we need to compare the art market's circulation capacity, but we also had to decide whether to participate in upcoming exhibitions to increase exposure. Since I hadn't been involved in art transactions for some time, I had to quickly catch up on the relevant knowledge. I threw myself into exhibitions, attended various gatherings, and engaged in conversations to get back up to speed. At first, I felt drained and overwhelmed, but as I became more proficient, I began to find it exciting, especially when negotiating prices with buyers and battling for better profit margins with sellers. A month later, Archer, who had picked me up from the airport, told me I had changed. He said that when we first met he thought I was just a dull, emotionally wounded woman. He hadn't realized how lively and charming I actually was. Maybe people here were just more generous with their compliments, but after spending so much time here, I really did feel more confident. There's so much sunshine here, and the proximity to the sea has changed me. I find myself enjoying outdoor activities more than I did back in Washington. Every evening after work, I often go for drinks with my studio colleagues at the beach bar. I feel the sea breeze, stroll along the beach at sunset, and on weekends, I swim in the sea or sunbathe on the shore. My skin has taken on a healthy, sun-kissed glow, and my body feels more toned. I even made a bet with my friends if I lost, I'd dye my hair. So now, I have highlights. The sea breeze makes my hair dry and slightly wild, falling in random strands around my face. I've adopted a whole new sense of freedom. In the evenings, just like before, my studio friends and I have barbecues by the beach. We were talking about a recent art acquisition when someone suddenly pointed out that someone seemed to be looking for me in the distance. "Lily, I finally found you." It was Daniel. I turned, and through the soft glow of the sunset, I slowly recognized him. Perhaps it was the long journey, or perhaps it was because I had grown used to the vibrant, energetic smiles of people here, but Daniel looked particularly worn out. "I finally found you. I checked the flights, your parents' company, and asked around." He trailed off. "Yeah, long time no see," I cut him off. I greeted my friends and told them I had a visitor from Washington and needed to step away for a bit. They immediately started teasing me, insisting I finish my drink before I could leave. I raised an eyebrow, prepared to down it in one go, but just as I was about to, Daniel rushed over, grabbed the glass from my hand, and said, "Don't you know how to drink? I'll do it for you." He took a few gulps before choking. The irony wasn't lost on me, he was the one who didn't know how to drink. With a sigh, I grabbed the glass from him while he coughed. I drank it all at once. My friends cheered, and I joined in their laughter for a moment before turning back to Daniel, who was awkwardly standing off to the side, fidgeting with his hands and feet, clearly unsure of what to do. "We've been together for so many years, don't you know I can drink a lot?" I said, rolling my eyes. Daniel's voice was soft, almost apologetic. "I didn't really know, because you don't drink normally." His explanation made me chuckle to myself. Daniel had quit drinking because of Abigail. He once told me that Abigail didn't like drunks, didn't want him drinking at all. So since we'd met, he hadn't touched a drop. I, on the other hand, had never been much of a drinker, but in the business world, it was a different story. People always tried to play the game of drinking and forcing others to join in. Whenever we went out for business meetings, Daniel would always sit out, and I'd end up taking over. I thought back to the times I'd gotten drunk and my colleagues had to drag me back, how Daniel had always looked at me with disgust. Later, when I drank too much, I'd purposely sleep in the guest room to avoid him, scrubbing the alcohol smell off my skin before seeing him. It made sense now. No wonder he never knew. No wonder he thought I didn't drink much. "Daniel, you don't know me at all," I said, looking at him. "I can actually drink a lot." He looked at me, still unsure. "Sorry, is it the same as Abigail, that you can't stand it?" A flicker of anger flashed across Daniel's face, but he quickly suppressed it. "Don't mention her," he said, his voice tight. "You're different from her." I was indeed different from Abigail. She needed Daniel to save her, but I didn't. "Where's Abigail? Didn't she come with you?" I asked, not intending to provoke him, but simply out of concern. After all, Abigail wasn't in a good place right now, suffering from depression and an infectious disease. If something happened to her, who would be responsible? What if, in the future, Daniel came to me and said he couldn't go back to care for Abigail because he'd come to see me? Wouldn't that leave me feeling terribly wronged? "Don't mention her," Daniel snapped, his face twisted in disgust. "Abigail and I have nothing to do with each other." I took a few steps back, my eaves never leaving him. I hadn't realized it before, but now it was clear, Daniel was an incredibly selfish person. He didn't love Abigail the most, he loved himself the most. If he truly loved her, he wouldn't have said that he didn't want to wrong himself before the wedding, leaving me behind while he chased the idealized version of first love in his mind. Unfortunately, that first love had already soured. He couldn't save it. Later, Daniel looked back and realized that I was actually doing well, and suddenly wanted to win me back. "Daniel, you're so boring," I said, unable to hide my disappointment. "I really overestimated you. I thought you didn't keep Abigail when you met her in college because you thought you weren't worthy of her," I continued, "but actually, it wasn't that. You just couldn't handle the hit to your self-esteem, so you pretended to be generous." Before I could finish, Daniel interrupted me, his urgency apparent. He stepped closer, just like in the past when we argued, intending to pick me up and take me away, dealing with me coldly afterward. But I didn't obey Daniel anymore. Not this time. Since he had come all this way to perform his dramatic win-back routine, I felt it was time to finally vent. I used the self-defense techniques I'd learned recently, breaking free from his grasp with a sharp elbow strike. I stood in front of him, watching his shocked expression, as though he had just met me for the first time. "I learned self-defense skills in Chicago," I said, "but I never thought I'd use them on you." It took him a while to regain his composure. "Lily, we've been together for so many years. My feelings for you haven't changed," he said, trying to pull me back in. I used to love looking into Daniel's eyes. Every time I did, I saw my own reflection, and I could deceive myself into believing he cared about me, that he loved me. But now, when I looked into his eyes, all I saw were lies and the years I had wasted. He pulled out a ring from his pocket and knelt on one knee. "Lily, let's forget Abigail. Just treat her as a small chapter before we get married. I'll give you the best life." I didn't even hear the rest of his words. When I saw the ring, it felt as though all my strength drained out of me. I never imagined that the proposal I had waited for so long would come on a beach in Chicago at dusk. No flowers, no fancy venue, just me in a simple shirt and jeans, standing in this casual place. If this had happened before, I would have been thrilled. I would have accepted the ring, ignoring everything else. But now, all I wanted to do was throw that ring and box right back in Daniel's face. So what? I snapped. Do I really deserve to have waited for you all these years? Deserve to be your backup? Just like when you were dumped by Abigail, I just happened to show up, right? Because I have a good family background, I look a bit like her, and I like you and am willing to do anything for you, he said. So you agreed to be with me as your plan B? I retorted bitterly. You think I'll always be here, waiting for you to come back, and that I'll happily throw myself into your arms? Daniel, I would rather have never met you, I added, my voice breaking. I fought the urge to smash the ring in his face. Instead, I turned and walked away, heading back to my friend's party. Maybe it was the salty sea breeze or the sand that stung my eyes, but I couldn't stop my tears from falling. My friends, sensing my pain, were quiet. They didn't ask any more questions. They just handed me tissues and picked up the conversation where it left off. Archer came over and patted me on the back, teasing me about how I had lied when I first arrived in the US, claiming I didn't have an ex-boyfriend who was still so deeply entangled in my life. I hit him lightly, annoyed. He smiled, unfazed, and said, Lily, I know what your problem is. You need a new relationship to move on from the last one. Why don't you consider me? I had no response. I just stared at him, unsure of what to say. Archer shrugged and added, I'll take you to the liveliest party here. You'll meet more guys, and everything will be fine. I gave him an exasperated look and turned down his ridiculous suggestion. After saying goodbye to my friends, I left for the studio to deal with some work. The studio was eerily quiet, the only sound was the soft rustling of papers as I sorted through files. In the stillness, Daniel's words from earlier flashed through my mind. Suddenly, I remembered what he had said just before I walked away. Lily, I'll only keep you this time, he had said, his voice low and heavy. Don't worry, I won't pester you anymore. I won't see you again. You and Abigail are the same. I don't want to face either of you again. I walked too quickly, swept up in the excitement of the moment. I didn't stop to think about his words. It wasn't until early the next morning when I heard an unusually loud siren that everything started to make sense. A police siren blared as it rushed past me. Archer took me out of the studio, and it was then that I learned what had happened. Daniel had been taken away by the police, covered in blood. In the dim light of that morning, I thought I saw him smile at me. Lily, he had said in my mind, it's so scary that your ex-boyfriend dared to attack with a gun. But it's strange, he continued, the person he attacked doesn't seem to have anything to do with you. Archer kept speaking, recounting what he'd learned from the news, but all I could focus on were a few key words. Daniel, attacked with a gun, killed someone. The name Abigail escaped my lips before I even realized it. My brain barely processed it. Archer looked at me, surprised, and nodded. The gem collector, also from Washington. The gems he had were worth a lot. He came here, but after hearing your name, he insisted on coming to see you. The gem collector, Archer continued, he might have been the one who brought Abigail to Chicago, and then abused her. I didn't fully understand what Archer meant, but something clicked in my mind. Later, when I looked up the collector's information, I saw his blurry photo. My instincts told me everything. Daniel didn't come to Chicago just to save me. He was here for something else entirely. Maybe it was for revenge. To make the person who had tormented Abigail for years pay. 3 days later, the police called and asked me to come in for questioning. Have you been extorted or had your personal safety threatened recently? They asked. I shook my head, unsure of what to say. They continued to ask, pressing for any unusual occurrences in my life or enemies I might have made. I had only just arrived here, my social circle limited to colleagues and industry contacts. It seemed unlikely that I had anything to worry about. That was until they showed me the surveillance footage from near my house. The police explained that, over the past week, 2 people had repeatedly been in the vicinity of my home. One of them, just this morning, had put a hallucinogenic drug into the fresh milk I usually ordered. Luckily, I had been in a rush this morning and hadn't collected the milk IR time. The surveillance footage was clear. After reviewing it multiple times, one of the figures was unmistakably Daniel. The police brought me to see him. When I sat down and met his eyes, which had lost all their usual spark, I couldn't help but feel a pang in my heart. "You poisoned me?" I asked, my voice trembling with disbelief. Daniel's smile was bitter and his voice quiet. "Lily, am I so unbearable to you?" he asked, his words sending a chill down my spine. "I came here last week. I found you then. Why do you think I didn't approach you right away?" His words sent a shock through me. "The person who hurt Abigail," he continued, his voice growing colder, "he couldn't go back to Washington to bring her back, so he found you instead." I remembered that I had attended an art trade appreciation event in the next state before. But I never imagined I would run into him there. "He knows your information and your connection to me," Daniel said, his hands cuffed, trembling. "So you followed him, afraid he might attack me?" My voice shook with the weight of it. "So what you said that day, you didn't want me to go through what Abigail did?" I asked, struggling to understand. Daniel didn't respond. He was led away by the police to go through the necessary legal procedures before being sent back to our country. Before leaving, he handed me a letter. Inside was a photo of us at graduation. It was a moment I had cherished, when I wrote in my yearbook, "Lily will marry Daniel, a couple for life." On the back of the photo, Daniel had written, "I owe you. I hope to repay it." It felt like my heart had been struck by a blunt force, a deep discomfort that lingered far longer than the pain itself. Daniel, even now, couldn't hear my farewell. 3 years later, Daniel was released from prison. His sentence was reduced due to my testimony, which led to his conviction on self-defense grounds. On the day of his release, I went to pick him up. I took him back to the house we once shared for 7 years. It was still the same clean, with only a few traces of me left behind. I hired hourly workers to maintain it, but there were no signs of my presence. Following tradition, I prepared grass to ward off evil spirits and a brazier to keep him safe. I also told him I had helped Abigail find a job, and she was now doing well in another city. I returned the photo he had left me all those years ago. "Daniel," I said softly, "I hope you live a good life." Daniel didn't speak. His eyes, however, remained fixed on the wedding ring I was wearing. "Are you married?" Just as I was about to leave, Daniel finally asked. "Yes," I replied, turning my ring absent-mindedly. "We're a perfect match. He loves me very much, and I love him too." The action felt familiar, reminding me of when Abigail told me she was getting married. "I wish you happiness," Daniel said after a long silence. If I hadn't insisted on finding Abigail that time, would things have turned out differently for us? His voice carried the weight of a question left unasked for too long. I didn't answer. I didn't know the answer. After all, I was just an insignificant bystander in this story. For years, I had been nothing more than a passive observer. The decisions had always been Daniel's. "Daniel," I said quietly, "I'm actually glad you brought this up." He looked at me, waiting for me to continue. "Otherwise, it would have been harder to end things if we had actually gotten married," I admitted. "I wanted it to end gracefully, and somehow, it did." Daniel didn't speak any further. The words he had been holding back remained unsaid, swallowed by the silence between us. "I wish you happiness," he finally murmured. "Yes," I replied, my voice steady. "I will be happy." Today's story is over. Thank you all for listening.